Hello, I'm Dan Earlywine, and Stuart McDonald and myself would like to welcome you to my shop and to our new videotape in our series on guitar finishing. This is the second one, called Spray Finishing with Colors, and that's a big job, believe me. When you talk about colors, you're basically talking about dyes and pigments. A dye is a color that you can see through where the wood grain shows. Basically, those are stains. A pigment is a solid color, perhaps like seafoam green or black or white, something you can't see through. All of these colors are going to be soluble in either water, alcohol, or lacquer, and they'll be put either on the bare wood or in the finish. First, I'll introduce you to the colorants that we're going to use so you'll recognize them as we go through the tape. First, we're going to look at the water-soluble colors, starting with the dyes. There's more colors available in water-soluble than anything else. This is a powdered aniline. It's a Lockwood brand. It comes in a little envelope of powder, about an ounce, and you mix it in hot water to get a very brilliant color, and you can see through it, and it lets the wood show through. That's a dye stain. Another dye stain that we have, and they're really great, are the clear water colors. They're called thixotropic. That's with an X. Thixotropic, and they're very thick, like Jell-O. Because of that consistency, they really cling well, and they're very easy to apply, and the colors are brilliant. You'll love those. The Lockwood water stains can be used straight as you mix them from the package, or you can thin it with water to get a weaker shade. The clear water colors, which are thixotropic, will stick to your knife. One of the advantages of these is that they don't run into side grain and end grain. You can paint them on and wipe them on, spatula them on, anything you like. With the thixotropic stain, you get a really even coverage. That's the advantage of it. This is actually a new product on the market. Watch this test. Here's a straight water stain. This is Lockwood Ruby, red, wiped on end grain. The other end I'm going to use thixotropic. I just want to show you how one soaks in and the other doesn't. That's a big advantage when you're staining bare wood. The color is still there, but you can still see the grain. And on this end here, it's just dark as can be. Thixotropic stains don't tend to soak into side or end grain. Really, the only pigments we have that are water-soluble are the base concentrates. You might use those to color hydrocoat, make paint out of it. This is red base concentrate. You might use it on the wood fillers. Hydrocoat has its own wood filler, and it can be tinted or colored with base concentrate to alter the shades. Hydrocoat's got two different colors of filler. One is the walnut that's in this jar, and this one I'm mixing here is the natural color. I'm going to color it with the base concentrate. Speaking of hydrocoat, you can also color it with the stains that we looked at a moment ago. You don't have to use just the base concentrates in it. What you see here is clear hydrocoat with some red water stain in it. That makes a hydrocoat shader. What a shader is a clear lacquer or a clear hydrocoat, some type of finish that you add color to so you get a transparent finish. Our Wolf products, the Wolf Ruby and the Wolf Gold and the Wolf Yellow, those are shaders. Here's one way to make a shader. Take your water stain, this is a Lockwood aniline mixed up water stain, and put it into your hydrocoat. Now you have a shader. The trouble is that you just added water to it, and we always teach you to spray hydrocoat straight as much as possible. In fact, if you want to thin hydrocoat or add anything to it, we recommend that you use flow-out additive or reducer. My favorite is flow-out additive. I always add a little bit to my hydrocoat anyhow whenever I spray it. You guessed it. So what I'm doing now is taking my water powder, Lockwood Ruby, in the dry form and adding it to the flow-out. Since I'm going to add flow-out anyhow, I'll use that as the liquid to break down the powder. This way I can get a much stronger concentration of red into my hydrocoat. This is the one that I mixed up using the flow out. This is the first one I mix. It's a little milkier and not quite as strong a solution. Now we're going to go on to the alcohol stains. Basically we have Solar-Lux NGR and other stains that come in powdered form. NGR means that it's non-grain raising. It's liquid, pre-mixed, and easy to use. This is the new Solar-Lux. What that means is that it's light fast now. It's always been well known that alcohol stains aren't as light fast as the water stains. That means they fade quicker. Well, these new ones don't, and that's a real plus. Solar-Lux has its own reducer, so if you don't want to use it straight out of the bottle and feel that the shade is too strong, you can reduce it or thin it using reducer. It also has a retarder for moist days. It's not a bad idea to add a little bit of that to your Solar-Lux if you're worried about blushing and drying on those moist days. As for the powdered stain, you use methanol to break it down, and you mix your own just like if you were making the water stain. I'm going to show you in a few minutes how to measure out your powders, whether you're making lacquer, water, or alcohol stains. It doesn't matter. Methanol is a type of alcohol, and Behlen sells it especially for mixing up with these powders. Shake it up real good, and it's best to let any of these powdered stains sit overnight before using them. Just like with our water stains in the Hydrocoat, you can take Solar-Lux and add it to clear lacquer and get a shader. We recommend that you add only 6% of Solar-Lux to lacquer for your shaders. You really don't need more than that. The old Solar-Lux used to be up to 10%, but that was pretty strong if you ask me. Now these lacquer shaders are meant to be sprayed. They generally wouldn't be wiped on. They're a little too weak for that. Okay, so I want to wrap up the first two color categories of water and alcohol by pointing out the good and bad points of each. Water stains. They're light fast. They have very bright colors. A disadvantage is that they do tend to raise the grain a bit if you haven't wet sanded well enough. Later on you'll see where the grain raising is an advantage when we use a process called grain enhancing. You can use the water stains with Hydrocoat to color them. These are dye stains, and its ability to be used with Hydrocoat is good because a water stain generally has to be used on the bare wood if it's under lacquer. But as a Hydrocoat colorant, you can make shaders with it. Now the alcohol stains, an advantage that they have is that they dry fast. They too have bright colors, although they're somewhat different. They're NGR, which is non-grain raising, and that's a big advantage. The drying fast and the NGR is the biggest reason that the larger companies use these, because it's faster in production. They also mix with lacquer, so you can use them to tint lacquer and get a shader. Some of the alcohol stains aren't light fast. The new Solar-Lux are. Some of the powdered ones aren't. That doesn't mean that you can't use them. It just means that they'll fade quicker than the water stains. Now we're going to look at the lacquer colorants, and then we can get on to weighing out some powders and getting on with the work, which I'm most anxious to do. First of all, with the lacquer colors, you can make your own lacquer thinner stain. Nothing but lacquer thinner and the powdered aniline. This is lacquer soluble. These are bleeders though. You're going to see as we go through the tape when to use these and when not to. Now there's a lacquer stain. If you add that to clear lacquer, you get a transparent shader. Speaking of transparent shaders, some of my favorites are the ones made by the Wolf Company. These are pre-mixed transparent lacquer shaders that don't tend to bleed. I don't know how they make them, but they're perfect for doing sunbursting, Paul Reed Smith type effects or Tom Anderson effects, getting that clear transparent finish that you can see the wood grain through. The colors are really hard to match. I've never been able to mix a red quite as good as their ruby. A little clear lacquer here, and what I'm using now is the master color. That's the base concentrate. The others were dye stains. This is a pigment. got some poured off in a jar here. If you add master color to clear lacquer, you're going to get paint. I call it paint because you can't see through it. You know, I'm going to make a white lacquer here. If you start with a white lacquer and add red master color, that's a quick way of getting there. You're using a white lacquer as your base coat, especially for pastel colors. If you add red to white, you get a nice pink. This is a base concentrate, a pigment. Okay, now for a review of the lacquer colorants. You got your Wolf Transparents, which comes somewhat thick like any lacquer, and it needs to be thin before you spray it. You can thin it with thinner, and you can extend it with clear lacquer if the shade is too strong. You've got Solar Lux, which you can mix into clear lacquer. The absolute maximum is 1 part to 9 parts clear lacquer. You have base concentrates that can go into clear lacquer and give you solid colors. That's a pigment. And you have your lacquer-soluble powders. The lacquer-soluble powders are anilines that you put into lacquer thinner like we showed you. They do tend to bleed under lacquer, so you can't overdo it with those. When you use them, you might want to seal them in with shellac. They can make transparent shaders, similar to the Wolf's, by mixing them into clear, but again, these are bleeders. One of my biggest uses for them is I mix them with super glue to get instant color touch-ups, especially in the transparent and clear shades. The red, yellow, blue, and green powders go beautifully into super glue. They're also soluble with oil-based products, such as naphtha, some varnishes, and wood filler even. The wood filler will tend to bleed though, although some companies used to use a bleeding wood filler that had this type of stain in it so that it would color the wood at the same time that it filled the grain. I'll be showing you about that later. For now, I want to begin to show you how to mix up these powders and make your own stains. I've got myself a dieter's scale here. It's a gram scale, and I got it at the yard sale for $6. It'll do a good job of dividing up the powders in smaller amounts, because if you take the whole jar or packet of powder, it's going to mix up a lot of stain, and I don't have room for gallons of stain around my shop anymore. I don't even have room for pints. I like to mix up the small 2-ounce Miller 2000 jars. It's just the right size for me, and it stores easily. When you're mixing up the powders, whether it's water, alcohol, or lacquer soluble, I basically work out of these 2-ounce Balin jars or the 1-ounce Lockwood packets. All the colors mix differently, and it depends on what the concentration of that color is, how much water, alcohol, or lacquer thinner you'll add to it. These are water stains. The instructions say gradually add 1 ounce of powder while stirring in 2 pints of hot water. Some of them will say while stirring in 1 pint of hot water, or they might give you a range, 2 to 4 pints. I always use the strongest solution, and I don't want to mix it all up at once. I don't want to use this whole ounce of powder. I know you want to get started painting, but bear with me here on a little bit of math here. You're going to need it. Write these measurements down if you don't already know them. Maybe the most important one here is the 1 ounce equals 28.35 grams. We'll do a lot of measuring of our powders in grams. Also, a teaspoon equals 5 grams. 3 teaspoons equals a tablespoon, that's 15 grams. And 2 tablespoons equals 1 ounce. If the instructions on the powder says use, for example, 2 to 4 pints of water, always go with the lower measurement, which is the stronger solution, because you can always thin it. They're telling us to use 32 ounces and 28.35 grams, because that's an ounce, right? Well, I want a 2-ounce measurement. How many grams of powder would I use then? Now you want to cross multiply here. 32 times x, 2 times 28.35, and you get this. Divide 56.7 by 32, and you get 1.771 grams for 2 ounces. I round that off to 1 3/4 grams. If you want to divide that in half, you'll get 0.875 grams per ounce for the smaller measurement. My 2 favorite jars are the little Badger 2-ounce airbrush jar and the Miller 2000 one. If you put a ruler on the table here on the outside of the jar and make a mark at 1 5/8 on the Miller jar, 1 3/8 on the Badger jar, that's the level to which 2 ounces of liquid will pour. I measured out that 2 ounces using a kitchen measuring cup on the 2 ounce mark. It measures 2 ounces. It doesn't weigh 2 ounces, no. I'm using this scale to measure the powders. Put a nice piece of clean paper on your scale and zero the dial to count for the weight of the paper, and measure out 1 3/4 ounces of powder. Oops, that's a little much. You could be more accurate on a digital scale, but I can get quite close to 1 3/4 grams here. There. Incidentally, that 1 3/4 grams is a level 1/2 teaspoon of this red powder. Eventually you're going to be using these kitchen type of measurements like a tablespoon and a teaspoon to do the job. This is a hardware store executive coffee cup heater. It's very inexpensive and it does a good job of heating small amounts of hot water, which is what you need to mix up these water stains. You should always use it hot. Shake it up good and let it set for a few hours to cool down. They recommend that these water stains be applied from a cold solution, but I've known lots of woodworkers that use them hot as they can handle anyway, because they think it penetrates better. Well, I'm getting tired of all this talk and this technical stuff, so now's the time for some hands-on experience. I've got plenty of small bodies that we made up for our testing because they're the perfect size to fit in the camera. Lots of big ones too. We're going to make a Telly Blonde out of this. This P-base is going to be a 3-tone sunburst. The thing I want to point out as we start is you're either going to put your color on the bare wood or on top of it in the finish, over the bare wood or some combination thereof. As we go through the rest of the tape, you're going to see all the various colors come into play. What I have here is 9 ounces of clear lacquer, straight, right out of the can, 100E. Normally I'd mix it with 1 part thinner to 2 parts lacquer, because I spray it 50 pounds and that's what the can says. But I'm going to add it to Solar Lux, and you can only add 6% of Solar Lux to clear lacquer. I might use the red too, maybe even brown. I'm starting out with a whole ounce of Solar Lux here, and that would be 10%. 9 parts lacquer, 1 part Solar Lux. But I'll never use it all, because I start out with a few drops just to see how I'm doing. And then mix it up and test it on a piece of plexiglass. I'm going to use this yellow shader to follow Mike Stevens' recipe for a vintage Fender Sunburst that we used in Volume 4 of Trade Secrets. I've already wash coated my bare ash here, filled it with a natural wood filler, and sprayed another coat of clear lacquer over that to seal it in. Now I'm going to spray on a coat of yellow shader to give this base. This is a case where the color is not going on the bare wood, it's going over a clear finish. I compare the plexiglass by laying it over the wood, and I can get a feeling for when my yellow is right. I need to add a little red and brown to this to get more of an amberish tone. I'm talking about a drop or two of red, just a little bit. Same with the brown. Don't overdo it. A little bit of brown, a couple of drops, and then check it on your clear plexiglass. That's your test to see how it looks transparency-wise. And for this 9 ounces of lacquer, I've used less than a whole ounce of Solar Lux. Probably half of that, which is about 6%. I'm using a 280 grit to scuff sand this sealer coat. This is actually clear lacquer, not sanding sealer. I don't tend to use a lot of sanding sealer, as we talked about in the first video, Volume 1. Before I spray the yellow, I want to make sure this is scuff sanded nice and level. No bumps or imperfections. Use a sanding block on the flats. This is ready to spray the yellow on. I'm going to concentrate on the flats. I don't need to worry about the sides or the rims, as we call them, because they're going to be dark. This is going to be a three-tone sunburst. I don't need to put yellow in the cutaways then. When I spray clear lacquer, I tend to spray like this, overlapping that way. When I'm spraying colors on grain like this, I'll tend to go lengthwise with the grain. If you spray color across grain and one lap is a little darker than the other, it might show up against the grain going this way. It's noticeable. Something to think about. Since you want the pattern to go up and down, turn the nozzle vertically. The vertical nozzle gives you a horizontal pattern. I'm spraying, by the way, with 2 parts of that yellow lacquer to 1 part thinner. That makes a good yellow base coat for my sunburst. Since you last saw this, I've gone ahead and sprayed 3 coats of clear gloss lacquer on it as a sealer to lock in the yellow. Michael Stevens in the Trade Secrets recipe says spray 4 to 6 coats of clear lacquer over the yellow. And when the yellow is locked in, after a couple of coats, start sanding. The idea is you don't want any yellow to come off on your paper in case that Solar Lux bleeds up into the lacquer, which it's not. It's locked in real well. And he tells you to sand a lot because he doesn't want you to pile up the lacquer. You might end up sanding off as much as you're putting on. You're trying to get a good level surface to spray your sunburst on. This is almost level, but not quite. I can still see a few shiny spots like we talked about in the first series of this tape, Volume 1. I think I'll spray 1 more coat of lacquer, and when that's level, we'll do our sunburst. As long as I'm shooting clear lacquer, I took my Telecaster here, and I'm going to catch that up to the P-base body. This is bare ash. I used the natural wood filler on it, and I'm sealing it in with plenty of coats of clear lacquer for the same reason, to get a good, flat, level finish that I can spray my white shader on. This is going to be a Tele Blonde. Okay, I've got a good 4 or 5 coats of clear gloss lacquer on both these bodies now. This Tele I'm going to set aside, and we're going to mix up some transparent white lacquer to make a Tele Blonde. The P-base we're going to sunburst. I think I'll do the base first. My final sanding of this finish before I put the sunburst on it to get it nice and level is with a 320 grit free cut paper. What you're looking at here is the finish on my 56 Stratocaster. It's a 2-tone sunburst with a yellow base and the blackish brownish outer border. The camera tends to give it a reddish look that it really doesn't have. This does have the red look because it's a 3-tone burst with red added in. We're going to spray the P-base body with the 3-tone sunburst, but follow Mike Stevens' recipe for the 2-tone because the basic techniques are the same. All you have to do is throw that red in there, and I'll show you how to do that. I cut the tip off one of my super glue pipettes to transfer paint. I'm going to use the Wolf Transparent lacquers to do my shading here. Starting out with the red and using a little of the goldish brown. I might use gold and brown together, you'll see. And I'll probably darken it with a little black lacquer when I get towards that opaque look on the edges. I'm going to thin the red ruby lacquer 50-50. 1 part thinner, 1 part lacquer. It comes quite thick. I'm going to spray my sunburst using the Badger airbrush with the large tip. If the lacquer won't spray, just add more thinner until it will. I'm using a scrap piece of a white vinyl pickguard material here to test my samples on. It's spraying a little bit dry. I'm going to add some more thinner. It's also spitting a little bit. You want to find out if it's going to spit now, not on the guitar. With the airbrush, you got to keep it clean, even in between spraying like now. I'm just going to run a little thinner through it. Right away, you got to keep it washed out. A little more thinner, and try her again. The step of spraying this red would be eliminated if you do the 2-tone sunburst. If you spray the red now, then when we come back with the black or the brown, it'll overlap it properly. If you did the brown first and then came over it with the red, it would be out of order. The red might look funny. Whether or not you spray your red on the sides or the rims is up to you. In this case I'm not. A lot of times I would. I didn't spray yellow on the side, so I'm not going to spray the red either. I know I'm going to go to a pretty dark blackish brown and you won't see it. There are times when I'll do a sunburst like this, however, that I would definitely spray red on the edges and my yellow and layer my colors. Layer the yellow and the red goes over that, and a more transparent brown for a weaker sunburst like some of the old ones you've seen in the 50s that you can almost see through on the edges and see the grain. This one is not. I'm going to go pretty dark. I'm going to finish up this side with the red, and then I'm going to mix up some of the wolf brown. It's transparent, but it's a very dark brown. I'm filling up this Badger airbrush jar half full with the wolf brown. It's transparent, but it's very dark brown, and I'm going to add some black lacquer to it to help give it a little bit of opacity, make it opaque. Don't use a lot of black. Just start with a few drops at a time, stir it up, and check it. Give her the old plexiglass test. It's a good way to check transparency. I want it so I almost can't see through it. I want a pretty black brown. Once I get the color, I'm going to add half thinner at least till it sprays. If you haven't got the Wolf black lacquer but you have the Master Color base concentrate, use it. Add some black base concentrate to darken up your transparent brown. You see, the Wolf Gloss Black Lacquer is already made for you. Some people prefer to keep the base concentrate sitting around on the shelf and mix their own. Master Color is a pigmented base concentrate for lacquer. I've got the shade I want now, and here's a really good tip from Mike Stevens. Trace out the shape of the body on a piece of stiff brown paper. And cut that pattern out about 1 inch in from the traced line, so it's a little smaller than the actual shape. I'm cutting out 2 sheets at once. It's a worthwhile thing to tape off the whole top because you won't get any splatters or overspray out on the main body. Be as neat and clean with your taping as you can. I'm a little raggedy here, but I'll clean it up in a second. You want to get a pretty smooth line. You're going to spray your black now on the rims, and this will keep it from getting on the top. Then we'll feather sand this lightly. Tape off both sides, and then you can spray the rims dark. Spraying my black now, I can be quite free with it because the paper is going to protect the top. I can wrap right around the edges, and later when I take the paper off and do my sunburst, I'll be spraying from the inside out towards the edges, and I won't get any chance of splatters then either. Don't spray any more paint than you have to, just enough to cover it, just as soon as it turns opaque. Try to keep a thin finish. Now, I'm not too worried about spraying a perfect line up to the tape. The whole idea is the paper just protects the big area. Now I'm going to come from the inside out and blend everything in with dark blackish brown. I'll feather this line in with my black paint, spraying from the inside. Whoops, almost forgot. Before I spray the black, I like to just feather down that hard line from the tape, especially if there's a straight, squarish looking edge, just so there's no ridge that I can feel. Now remember, these are colors that are on or in the finish, not on the bare wood. Pretty soon we'll get on the bare wood with some stains. But first, and while this is drying, and before I put clear on this, I'm going to get that telly out and put a telly blonde finish on it. It won't take a lot of transparent white to cover this body, but I'm mixing up a whole pint anyway. This is pre-thinned. It's 2 parts lacquer, 1 part thinner again, and I'm going to add this white base concentrate to it. I need a fair amount of it so that it'll fill up at least halfway full on my quart gun so I can spray well. Even if I go upside down, it'll pick up the lacquer. I want the big gun because I want to get a really wide fan and lay that white out right away. I don't want a lot of small passes that'll possibly show white overspray on each pass. You'll see. You're not going to use a lot of base concentrate again. I'm going to put a little lacquer thinner in a jar and put the base concentrate into that, just to get it thinned down a little bit before I put it in the lacquer. I prefer not to add too much at once and just do it as I go. I wouldn't want to get too much too fast. I'll keep adding it till I get the color I'm after. It's still kind of weak. If you've got your white lacquer already mixed up, you can add it to the clear. You want to get a transparent white shader. Same thing again is run your little test on plexiglass for transparency. Yeah, this needs a little more paint. Sometimes I'm going to put the fan on and leave it on because these fumes really annoy me. That's one of the nice things about Hydro-Coat. It's not going to give you the fume problem. That looks pretty good. I'm going to put it into the gun now and give it a shot. Strain it into the quart can. You should strain all your lacquers before you spray them. You'd be surprised what comes out of them sometimes. I've also got one of those little cone-shaped strainers in the bottom of my spray gun siphon. I've got a piece of white oak here that closely resembles the color of ash. I'm getting my color sample on that. This is pretty good, see-through white. Now I'm going to spray the rims a little darker than I do the front and the back. Those edges get a little bit more opaque. That's the look I like. It's a transparent white finish, Fender Blonde. You can carry this one step further if you want to by putting some yellow and brown or amber in your first clear top coat to give it the butterscotch look. The early 50s Fenders always butterscotched, up till about 56 or 57 because their clear top coats would yellow. Then Fender found a lacquer that didn't yellow. That's why in the late 50s you'll see them and it still looked like this on Strats, Tellys, and Esquires. I think this is the neatest look. But we're going to butterscotch this because it's the most popular. Either way, this and the P-base body need 2 or 3 good coats of clear gloss lacquer before you do any sanding. Otherwise you'll be sanding into your color and you'll regret it. I'm going to mix up a little clear lacquer here with some amber tone to it as a top shader on that transparent white. But first I'd like to point something out about the transparent white that we mixed. When I mixed up that transparent white, I said just a few drops of the white base concentrate. But frankly, I ended up using about this much. Quite a good blob on the end of my knife. I probably used about that much. Quite a bit more than a few drops. I just kept adding it until I got the transparency I was after. You might want to leave the fan on when you do some of this mixing. What I've got here is some clear lacquer ready to spray. 2 parts lacquer, 1 part thinner. And I want to make it sort of amber toned or older looking, as if it was a yellowed lacquer. I'm going to use a little of my Wolf Gold. It's a beautiful golden brown. It's good for antiquing. I may also use some of this color that we mixed up for the undercoat on the P-base. I might use them both. I could also use Solar Lux, yellow, reds, and browns, but this will work perfectly. Again, I've got my super glue pipette with the tip cut off, and I filled it half full of the Wolf Gold. These are drops I'm putting in. 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to quit there and stir it up and try it. I'm trying to give you some feel for how much color I'm using. This time I can make my test right on the piece of wood that I've already sprayed transparent white on. and see if I'm getting the amber tone I want. It could be a little darker. Wasn't enough. A couple more drops. It was about half full. I'll never use all of this plunger full, I'll tell you. Try that. It was half full. Well, maybe I will use it all. It keeps being a little weak on me. There's about 3 or 4 more drops. Shake it up. Well, that's about how much I used. It looks pretty dark to you, but when you spray it out, it's really not as dark as it looks. Looks like a dark beer. I sprayed a quick shot there, but you can't hardly see it, so my eyes are off. I'm going to put it back in the jar and add some more brown to it. I'm going to add a little bit of that base yellow that we sprayed earlier. That's probably a ½ ounce. A little more brown. I thought I had it, but I didn't when I sprayed it. That's a good shot there. Shake that up and try it. Maybe this will do it. Be sure you strain it. I go through a lot of strainers. Most of the stores will give them to you for nothing. That's the look I was after. It's not overdone, which is important. You can put too much yellow and you'll ruin it. This looks like a lot of tellies I saw in the early 60s. They weren't really blonde anymore, but they weren't really butterscotch. I think they painted it that way in the beginning. The only way you'll find out the look for you is to go to a vintage guitar show and see the guitars so you can remember what they look like. That's what I did here, and I really like this. Now this guitar and the P-Bass both need 2 or 3 coats of clear lacquer on it, and I'm going to go off and do that now. You don't have to watch that because we did it on the first tape. I'll be back in a few minutes, though, with another guitar to color. Now we're going to put some color and stains on the bare wood using Hydro-Coat and lacquer. I'm going to start out with the Hydro-Coat to give myself a break from the fumes. It's a pleasure to work with. These 2 bodies are mahogany with maple tops. This one I'm going to do in a transparent blue with the exposed edge showing. It'll be wood, but it looked like binding for that modern sort of a Paul Reed Smith look, or Tom Anderson. This is a mahogany body with another maple top, but I've got it taped off. It's also got binding on it. I don't want to get any color on the top of this while I do the sides. I didn't paper off this maple top because it gets a separate step, so I'm going to set it aside. This body I want to do in a cherry sunburst. Sunburst the top and do a cherry back and sides, like a Les Paul. I could use a water stain or an alcohol stain, and the water stain will be a little bit more light fast. I've chosen to use a water stain because I like the color that I have, and I'm not in that big a hurry. Alcohol stains will dry quicker. Now when you use a water stain, you can wipe it on or spray it on. I have Lockwood powdered aniline mixed up into my water here. That's a water stain. And I've got plenty of clear water to thin it down with if I don't like the strength of the shade. To start with, you might want to cut the stain 50-50 in small amounts, just to see how it penetrates and how the color looks. I'll often use a water stain straight. Depends on the color. I'm less apt to use the alcohol stain straight because they tend to bleed a little bit more than waters. This little sample piece here. This is cut 50-50, that was straight, but this one is dry and that's not. They're both a little strong for me. I'll add a little bit more water and try that. I'm after a good strong color, but not quite that strong, because I'm going to layer my colors. I'm not going to do it all at once. This first coat of red will probably get followed with some brown. While that's drying, let me clarify what I mean about bleeding. The stain here is a water stain, this red one, and right next to it is an alcohol stain. That's Solar Lux. They both looked the same until I sprayed it with clear lacquer. In other words, you could see the grain lines perfectly. As soon as the lacquer hit the solar lux, the color jumped up into the lacquer and bled, and now it's hiding the grain. Sometimes you might want to use this effect, but I don't here. So this is another reason why you might make a choice between water or alcohol stains. Water stains won't bleed under lacquer, although they might bleed a bit under Hydrocoat. The reason Hydrocoat would make water stains bleed is they both have the same solvent, that's water. Lacquer makes an alcohol stain bleed because there's alcohol in lacquer. Lacquer would also make the lacquered powder aniline stains bleed. The more you learn about this, the harder it gets. Now we're going to get on with the water staining of that little body in a nice cherry red. Well, I call it cherry red. It's really the Lockwood Ruby red. And I'm probably going to follow that with another tone of red and a brown to get the color I'm finally after. You'll notice how it tends to soak in a little darker on the end grain. That's where the clear water stains come in handy. This is clear water stain here. You notice how I put that first batch up here. Watch how it blends in. You don't get streaking as much with the clear water. I could go in circles like I'm finger painting and then smooth it all out with the grain. It tends to dissolve itself quite well and gives you a really even covering. I guess what I'm saying is I like both of these stains. Clear water is still somewhat new to me, so I probably am especially fond of it because I like it so well. It doesn't run and it's not all watery, so when I come down on the end, it's not going to run down on me. It sits there nice and thick. So I find the clear water Thixotropic is the easiest to apply of any stains that I've ever used. Wipe off the excess. Gets a really even coverage. This is back to the water stain, which is a little sloppier and blotchier because it's so thin. You ought to experiment with both of them to see what you think. With all stains, and this is important, this goes for water, alcohol, lacquer, what have you, wipe off the excess. Don't just leave it sitting in big deposits on the surface. Wipe it off before you leave it to dry, and after it's all dry, wipe it off to make sure there's nothing sitting on the surface. You want it down in the wood. Oh, that's the beauty of these water stains. There's no fumes. You have to let that sit for about 3 hours to dry. As you can see with this little body, I haven't even tried the real thing yet. I'm sort of putting it off while I make my sample tests. You don't have to go this far in your sample pieces. You can just use a board. Now that's two different types of red, but it matches pretty well. One's Thixotropic and one's just the Lockwood water. They're both water soluble. It's dry now, and what I'm going to do is add a light bit of brown to it. You need a reddish brown to get that Gibson look. I'm using the dark wine Lockwood. It's too strong the way it is. It's very brown, so I'm going to mix it down with a little water first. Here's the dark wine straight over red. It's going to almost turn it brown. Now I'm going to thin it. This is the stuff straight, and I'll add water to it. More than 50% water. I want to thin it down. Let's try that. That's what I'm after. The combination of the red and the thinned down dark wine red, which is kind of a brown, give me the color I'm after. Now you can mix these two stains together in a jar and wipe them all at once if you want to. I like the idea of layering it because you get more control and you see it as it's happening. Of course, then again, I can go over that red with my Thixotropic Clearwater Rosewood color and get the same color I'm after, which is that reddish brown Les Paul SG color. I don't know what to do. Lockwood water stain, Clearwater Thixotropic water stain. They're quite similar. The Clearwater has no odor. Well, why do I have both? I've got the Clearwater stains, I've got the Lockwood stains. A couple of reasons. The Lockwood water stains, that's the ones you mix from powder, are stronger. If you're really after the darkest shades, these are more concentrated. The Clearwater stains are easier to apply. You could use either one of these to shade hydrocoating to get a transparent shader. Most often I tend to use the water stains for that because the Clearwater is new to me. I haven't really had as much chance to experiment with that, but I do know that you can. I don't know which one I'm going to use on my little baby here. I'm still thinking. I've decided to use the Lockwood for the red and the Thixotropic for the brown. Split them 50-50. You can spray this on if you want, but it's really not necessary. Once that's dry, it's time to do the wood filling stage after the first coat of stain on the bare wood. This is Hydrocoat we're using on this guitar, so we can't use an oil-based filler. We have to use the Hydrocoat water-based filler. I'm using the walnut, but it tends to dry a little bit chalky, and I'm going to darken it a little bit towards that red shade. That's the filler the way it comes right from Hydrocoat, and I'm going to color it with base concentrate. You can use this Hydrocoat base concentrate, raw umber and red, or I found a new product called Tinsol, which is another type of base concentrate. I use them both sometimes. I'm going to use a half a teaspoon of red base concentrate. That gives me a redwood filler. I want a touch of black, just a little teeny bit. And just a little squirt of Tinsol burnt umber. Smells great, no fumes. This Hydrocoat water-based wood filler dries really fast, but you can spray over it in a few hours instead of a few days like you have to wait for the oil-based filler. It's a little tougher to use though. I'll show you how. I'm practicing on a scrap piece so I can have this to take along with me as I spray. I'll test everything on this first. I say this is harder to use than oil-based because it does dry so fast. If you had a big guitar here, you couldn't cover the whole thing at once for sure. Maybe just the back if you're lucky. I squeegee it on with a little plastic squeegee I got at the auto parts store. This presses it down into the grain and save that excess. Now for the real thing. There's a lot of wood fillers that you can wipe them off with burlap or cheesecloth. You really have to move fast to get to that stage with this stuff. That's why I squeegee it. It'll dry quick. Wipe cross grain if you're trying to wipe it off the surface. You're trying to pack it down into the pores. As you learned in Volume 1, if you were on the first tape, the whole idea of wood filler is to fill the open grain woods. Mahogany is one you need it on. You wouldn't use it on maple. I gave this about a half an hour and it's dry. Dry enough to sand back to the wood anyway, and don't worry about sanding off any of that red stain you put on because we're going to restain it anyhow. Most of it will still take. The filler can get caught in this little crevice between the tape and the side, so I've got to remove the tape on the binding here to sand it flush. Then I can retape it. Now that's what it'll look like after you fill it and sand it back. You're almost to bare mahogany, but some of the pinkish red is still there and we're going to restain it. In case I didn't tell you before, this number 471 Scotch plastic tape is the greatest. It's very flexible and it follows any curve and paint just doesn't bleed under it. Well, one of my buddies here asked me how come I didn't just wipe the wood filler since it was red anyway right on the bare wood. Why did I stain it first? And I don't have a great answer for that, just because it's a little more uniform. Sometimes I do it the other way. I was taught to use it that way on the Hydrocoat filler, so I just do. Gets the stain down in the wood before the filler goes over it. But this filler definitely would have colored the wood all on its own. I'm wiping another coat of my red stain on it now, just like before. You have to sand real well when you're using water stain because it does tend to raise the grain. Some people consider that a disadvantage because I'm putting a lot of coats of water on here. It's doing all right. Nice filled grain, and it's restained. I'll set it aside to dry and do the same thing to my sample piece. This is once it's dry, this is what it looks like. This does a really good job of filling the pores with this kind of filler, especially when you go on the bare wood. There's other types of filler that you seal the wood and then do the filling, but I don't think it sticks this well. I originally had planned to use two different shades, the crimson and the ruby, to get my red. As it turns out, however, I like the red so well that we got from the first red, followed by the red filler, and then the washer red, that I'm going to go right on to Clearwater, right to my rosewood shade, to give that brownish tone that the SGs and Les Pauls had. Plus, it's going to give me the most even coverage. That's the finishing touch, I'll tell you. It's the perfect color. You got to wipe all the excess thixotropic stain off. As soon as this dries, we can remove the paper from the top and get on with our yellow base coat. To choose the right color for sunbursting the top, I'm checking my sample boards. I've taken all my stains and put them on spruce, maple, and mahogany, and you should do the same. I've got my Clearwaters on one side and my Lockwoods on the other. Right now I'm after a yellow. This will be fun. Now in reverse, I'm going to paper and tape off the sides and the back. There, now to get on with the yellow. Now there's a lot of ways of sunbursting. This is not the only one. One way would be to spray clear lacquer on top of this and then put the color over it. But that's not what this tape is about. We're doing colors on the bare wood. I'm going to use the Clearwater yellow with a little Clearwater red and brown, just a tad, to get a nice amberish yellow base coat. A tad of the rosewood and a micro dot of the red. These colors mix together real nice, the Clearwaters. And again, I like the thixotropic because it's not real messy, it's easy to apply. I'm not worried about the binding here at all because I'll be doing a little scraping on that later. Wipe off the excess, let her dry. Remember that red shader that we mixed up earlier in the tape during the water-based section? It was the red aniline powder mixed into flow-out additive, a tiny bit of flow-out. Then that was poured into the Hydrocoat. I'm going to use that now as my shader for the sunburst. You can use Hydrocoat's flow-out additive or their reducer in very small amounts to break down your powders before you add it to Hydrocoat to get shaders. My first passes I'm going pretty light, getting the edges first, and then I'm bringing it towards the center. That's where my burst will start, towards the center, and you'll notice that I'm pointing the gun towards the outside of the body. Never point towards the center of the body or you could get splotches out there. I'm using the finest tip on my airbrush because you get a lot less chance of splatters with that. Don't use the medium or the heavy-duty tip. What I'm doing here is putting some brown walnut Lockwood powder into my flow-out, and I'm going to add this to the shader now to take my red and start turning it slightly brown. I like to keep adding the color to the original shader. Just a drop or two. This is a small amount I'm using. I'm staying away from this area. I'm starting to work out towards the edge now, so this will stay the original pink, but I'll get reddish brown and then brown towards the edge. I need a little more brown now. This will probably be my final color. If you look carefully along here, you can see some pooling or little blotches where the color is starting to precipitate, and you can see the wood through it. That's because I sprayed it too thick and too wet. I've let it dry, and I'm going to very lightly sand it with 800 paper just in this area along the edge. I won't sand the whole thing because you don't want to sand on a sunburst if you can avoid it. Then I'll follow with some more color. It's really only in this one area, but of course if I put color here, I'm going to have to go all the way around lightly with it. Stay off of the delicate feathering in out here. Once you touch that with sandpaper, it doesn't look right. Here's a neat tool idea I got from Pat Wilkins, the famous sprayer on the West Coast. A little wooden dowel with a slot cut in it, and I've got the blade from a mat cutting knife in there. Makes the perfect depth gauge for scraping binding. This really saves a lot of time. What I'm doing here is I'm spraying mist coats, not too wet, quite dry, to lock those colors in. Your first couple of coats shouldn't get too wet. Just spray them on dry. That's very important, or else your colors could bleed or run on you. You don't want that. See up here, it shows you how dry it is. It's not a high gloss. Then in your second and third coat, you can start spraying a little wetter. I let this dry about a half an hour in between coats. This is Hydrocoat Gloss. I'm spraying my sample pieces too. That's important, so you have something to test on all the way along. When I say let it dry a half an hour in between coats, that's only if you're spraying the dry coats. Once you start laying on a gloss, you should give it several hours. This is a sunburst sample too, so I can test my sanding later. This is a piece of crud that spit out of my gun. Thank God it wasn't on my sunburst, because I didn't have a filter on my siphon tube. I'll let this dry and I'll be able to sand it out, but it was a close call. You can avoid that by always keeping a filter on the siphon tube. That's the small cone type, and this is the large basket type. It's very common for a sunburst to bleed on the edges like you see there, and you may have to scrape a couple of times when the color runs out on the plastic. Scraping the binding can leave a little lip of color here that you can fill in with a little extra clear finish as you're spraying. Eventually you'll feel no line if it's not too thick of a sunburst color. So I could have used tape to tape off the binding, and my overspray would have gotten on that instead of the binding. I find that scraping leaves a little cleaner edge, but you have to get the finish while it's still somewhat soft, maybe 15 minutes to a half an hour after you spray the sunburst, before it gets hard and chippy. Before I do any sanding on the real thing, once again I work on my sample pieces. I'm sanding to see if the color is locked in yet. The last pass came up kind of red. This time I'm locked in after about 2 or 3 coats of Hydrocoat. As soon as the paper is white, you know you're ready to give a pretty good level sanding in between coats. This little guitar is ready to sand now, but I'm going to set it aside because this tape isn't about clear finishes. It's about color. And now I want to show you another way to color the bare wood with a transparent blue on curly maple. This finish will be similar to a Paul Reed Smith. By the way, all the colors that we used on this little body could have been used under lacquer and would look great if you want to go that route. You can't use an oil-based wood filler under Hydrocoat, but you can use all these water-based products under a lacquer. Now here's the little body that we set aside earlier that I said needed another step. It's got a curly maple top and a mahogany body, and there's no binding on it. Here's the first thing we're going to do. I'm going to tape off the top to expose an imaginary wood binding. Then I'm going to seal this with clear lacquer so only this one little thin edge of maple is sealed from the stain that I'm going to put on the top. This blue plastic tape that I told you about is perfect for doing this job. It bends around corners real easy. It's very flexible and the lacquer won't bleed underneath it. You got to paper off the sides now and the back and the front. All you're going to have left is this one little line of maple, and we're going to seal that up with clear lacquer. The reason for this is so that when I wipe on my water stain on the curly maple, it won't ruin the edge here, because this is going to look like binding when we're all done. If I don't seal it now, the stain's going to take into it. Spray 2 coats of clear lacquer on there. It's very important that you get an even coverage, otherwise the stain will bleed down into it. That's what you're looking for. The sprayed edge where you're going to have the binding look later when we enhance the grain. Even though I'm going to put a blue top on this guitar, I'm starting out with the Lockwood water stain, silver gray. When you enhance the grain, you're putting a water stain down into the maple, or whatever the wood is. It's got to have grain though. And that brings the grain out when it soaks into the dark lines. I like the look of this silver gray underneath the blue, as you'll see in a moment. Since I sealed off the edges, we're not going to get any stain on that binding edge. With the little black stain on the body, by the way, this is not a bad look. It's beautiful. I've seen some of these in Paul Reed Smith's booth that were sort of silver gray in the flame maple. It's pretty. I'm going to let this dry and then sand it all back off again. I'm sanding with 220 and one of these Mirror Glaze foam backers as a pad. It follows the contours. I'm trying to stay off the clear lacquer binding, but I know I'll sand into it because I want to get this wood as white as I can get it and just leave the dark stain in the grain. That's what I mean by sanded out. The grain still looks sort of gray. I sanded away most of the lacquer protection on this side over here. It didn't come off on this side. I don't care because I'm going to re-lacquer it. I'm going to divide this guitar down the middle and make it blue 2 different ways. The treble side will be my first attempt. I'm going to retape it off now and spray lacquer on that part that I sanded into to make sure that my blue stain won't get in there. This side I'm going to leave alone. Tape it again. Paper it off again and spray this edge one more time. Mostly the top, the side's still fine. Okay, now for the blue. I'm still going to leave the base side papered off though. I want to leave that side covered. The other side won't need its binding taped off anymore. Just this side, the treble side. Actually, this is the easy part. I've got my sample of maple here and I've looked at my stains and I've chosen Clearwater. This blue right up here. I like the Lockwood blue too, but maybe it's a little stronger than I want, and I can't use them all. I could use an alcohol stain, I can use the Lockwood water or the Clearwater. I'm kind of going with Clearwater a lot because it applies so easily. Wipe off the excess. And that's it. Pretty simple, isn't it? See how the grain stands out because we enhanced the grain. Once that blue's dry, we can go on with the rest of the story, which is to make the other half blue too. It's dry now, and I'm going to spray a coat of clear lacquer on both sides, covering the bare side and the blue side. That way you get a chance to see the difference between a blue stain on the bare wood and a blue stain over the wood with the clear lacquer coat in between. This is the Wolf Transparent Blue mixed 50-50 with thinner. 1 part thinner, 1 part lacquer to get to a spraying consistency. I've got a couple of 3 coats of clear lacquer on that maple now to protect it, and I'm going to lay the blue over that. That's not a lot of blue, 1 quick pass. Now we have 2 very different effects here. Well, maybe not so very different, but to me they are, and when you do it at home it will be. This is the water stain on this side, and then I sprayed clear lacquer over the whole thing, which sealed the bare maple on that side. Now I've sprayed the coat of blue shader over it, and I can scrape the binding because it's got clear underneath it. I can scrape this blue down to the clear and I'll get the same look as I have over here for a binding. But there's a different look to the woods here, as you can see. Already the blue shader is starting to hide the grain a little bit. It hides the grain because you're looking at the wood through the finish instead of the stain being in the wood. Scrape it when it's still somewhat soft, within, let's say within a half an hour of when you spray it. You don't want it runny, but somewhat soft it scrapes best. Since the blue hangs right over the edge now, I could scrape this to any depth I want. This Pat Wilkins scraper does a great job. You might find that the paper and the tape on the side that's protecting the mahogany will get in your way, so finish your scraping when the paper's removed. One last paper and tape job. I'm going to take 1/4 of the top that was stained on the bare wood and has clear lacquer sprayed over it, and I'm going to shade that with blue too, so you get a double of blue effect. You get the original silver gray grain enhancing, the blue stain, and a very light blue shader. Now you should hit the whole top with the 2 or 3 coats of clear gloss lacquer. Before I spray the clear lacquer, I want to stain the body blue, and even though I have clear lacquer on the binding, I'm going to tape it off again just to give it a little protection from the blue stain. I want that to show up nice and clear. The stain probably wouldn't soak in too deep through this lacquer, but I don't want to take any chances. I'm going to use the Clearwater Thixotropic again. It does a perfect job, and it dries real fast too. That's one of the advantages of Clearwater over regular water stains, is it dries quicker. Something they add to it, I'm not sure what it is. I don't want to put wood filler on this bare wood like we did earlier on that red one. I'm going to put a wash coat on it now. My wash coat is my sealer coat. I'm sealing over the bare wood before the filler so that the color of the filler won't get in the wood. This is 4 parts thinner and 1 part clear lacquer. You could learn about this on the first volume of this series. The wash coat pretty much soaks into the wood and still leaves the grain open so it'll take the wood filler. I guess if nothing else, my goal on this tape is that you learn how to experiment on your own. That's what I'm doing right here. I've got some of the Behlen's natural filler here, and I'm coloring it green with Tinsol. It's a form of base concentrate. It's fairly mild compared to some of the others we have. I'm going to make a green wood filler to put over this guitar. I think I'll get kind of a strange effect. I'm going to show you some different ways of coloring an oil-based wood filler. This is natural. Could be brown. You can take a small amount of naphtha and add to that our lacquer oil soluble powder. This is green. Mix that up and then add that to the filler. because naphtha is the thinner for the wood filler. This doesn't give me the best green I've ever seen. It's kind of a moss green because some powders dissolve differently than others. This is naphtha into wood filler. Let's try another way. This one we just did, of course. That's the Tinsol. It's always the amount that you put into something, whether it works or not. And that's why I'm trying to teach you to practice on scrap and make these experiments yourself. Fresco powders is a good way to do it. You can use master color. Always start with the smallest amount possible. I put way too much out there. I didn't need all that. Finally, you have Japan color. All these methods you can use to color the oil-based fillers. I'm going to mix up this filler with Tinsol, I've decided, to get a green filler to go on my blue guitar. It's not going to color the wood because I put the wash coat of clear lacquer sealer over it. Well, I lied. I told you we weren't going to paper it off anymore, and I did have to do it one more time to protect it from this filler. You can put it on with a brush, a rag, or a squeegee. This is going to color it slightly, but not very much. Pretty much the wash coat's going to protect it, and the green's going to get down in the pores, and we're going to have a blue-green effect. I thought this would be a drastic way of showing you how to color wood filler, and there's a lot of ways you can do this for decorative finishes too. When this is all wiped off, it's going to be pretty subtle. Remember, with these oil-based fillers, you got to let them dry for 2 or 3 days. Now I've let this set up for about 15 minutes. It's hazed over. Now I'm removing the excess filler from the surface. We taught this in volume 1. You might want to look back to the first tape in this series and check it out. Basically, we're going to remove it all and just leave it in the pores. I don't always sand it back like I did with the water-based filler when I'm dealing with oil base. Sometimes I'll just wipe it off like this and leave it. There are fumes though. We got the naphtha in there. It looks good though. Very subtle. There's one more technique for coloring wood filler that I want to show you about, and then we're going to go on to something new. I don't want to bore you or confuse you, so I'll make this quick. A little bit of naphtha here, and we're back to the oil lacquer soluble powders. This is a blue. Break it down in naphtha. You could put it right in the wood filler if you wanted to. I tend to put it in naphtha first. What we're making up here is a bleeding filler. I talked about that earlier. If you spray the proper finish over this, one that's soluble with the same solvents, it's going to bleed a bit and give you a lot of color. This is how Gibson got the color on their Cherry Les Pauls and SGs back in the late 50s and early 60s. A bleeding filler. Just a little naphtha and a little stain and stir it right into your filler. You can pre-stain the wood if you want to, or put the filler right on it and let the filler do all the coloring. You've got a lacquer-soluble aniline powder in here, and when lacquer hits that, it's going to really pop to life. I used to buy a shader from Gibson that was called Cherry Shader, and it was a dark brownish red, and you put it right on the bare wood, and it didn't look too great until you hit it with lacquer, and all of a sudden all that aniline powder would come to life, and you had that SG or Les Paul look. It's a bleeder though. That means it'll run up into your top coats for the first 3 or 4 coats of clear lacquer. Okay, that's enough said about bleeding filler. I'm going to show it to you later when I spray a little clear on this. Now you could have put a stain under it too and get all these different effects. Like I'm telling you, try this at home on your own. Bleeding fillers are kind of neat. It's just one way to go. There's so many ways to go. Now it's 3 days later, and I want to put a finish on this guitar. I want to spray a little bit of light blue shader over it like we did the top, but I want to make it myself. I'm not going to use Wolf this time. I want to get a little different shade. Plus somebody asked me, what if I want to make my own out of an alcohol stain? Can I add alcohol stain to lacquer like you can add Solar Lux to lacquer? You can, but let me show you how to do it. If you want to add the alcohol stain right into lacquer, it's really not advisable, but you could get away with it, although we don't recommend it. When you mix up an alcohol stain and want to put it into lacquer to make your own shaders, like we had Solar Lux earlier, you've got to add back in some active solvents to take the place of the alcohol that displaces that in the lacquer. You could use acetone, you could use lacquer retarder, but it's kind of chemically complicated. It's much simpler if you do this. Instead of using methanol to mix up the stain, simply use Solar Lux Reducer. Substitute this for methanol and put your powder right into it, and then you can add that to lacquer without worrying about all the chemical compositions. The way Lockwood recommends to mix up their alcohol powders is to use the largest amount of liquid. In this case it says 2 to 4 pints. They want you to use 4 pints of the reducer. I still tend to use the same ratio that I used earlier, which is the strongest one. That means 2 ounces of alcohol would get a half a teaspoon of the powder. But in this case I'm using Solar Lux Reducer, not alcohol, so that I can add this to lacquer. You cannot add more than 6%, and this is quite strong. You should be able to get a good shader with that. But remember, this is a homemade Solar Lux. It's not light fast. It's not the same as the new Solar Lux. I'm going to make a real weak shader here. This is going into straight lacquer. I've got to thin it before I spray it, just to give the lightest blue on the back of that guitar. Can't believe I got to paper it off one more time. I'm going to hit it with a little blue and then put clear on it. There you go, a nice subtle shade of blue. I didn't overdo it. And you can see the mahogany because we put that sealer wash coat on it, and it protects the wood from the stains in the filler. I think this is a real nice look. By the way, here's half of that guitar with clear and the other half's left alone. You can see how that bleeding filler pops to life. Well, okay, now I've got a special treat for you. We're going to leave this and drive out into the country to my friend Don McCrosty's house and watch him sunburst on a mandolin. I think you'll really enjoy this.
Hi, I'm Don McCrosty and welcome to the country. This is the view out my shop window. I've got a couple of mandolins to finish, and I'm going to do them in sunburst with the stains in the wood or on the wood. And this is my spray booth, and these are the instruments that I'm going to be working on. Wood preparation on a sunburst finish is extremely important. Once you get the colors on here just like you want them, and they're fairly subtle the way they shade, if you sand through the clear coats on top of that and touch those colors, the touch-up is extremely difficult to pull off. When I finish curly maple, I always enhance the figure of the wood. I'll do it the same way Dan did earlier on the tape, using the gray water-soluble stain. After an hour of drying, I'll sand back, and I'll get a result that looks like this instrument I first showed you. The gray will remain down in certain parts of the flame. Now the last thing I do before actually putting the color on is to tape off the binding. Mask it off. I'm using masking tape. Tape off the fretboard and the nut and cover the sound holes. I'll show you how I do the sound holes next. Put a balloon in the sound hole and blow it up and tie it off. This is a piece of plastic from a milk jug, and the balloon will hold it up against the top. I'm going to adjust it with my knife point. This is a masking jig I put over my peghead decoration. On this instrument, it's been silk screened on. If color inadvertently gets on it, I won't be able to sand it off. Now this instrument is ready to spray, and I'd like to say just a few words about color. This is a finish I did several years ago and have really loved it so much that it's one I try to match in my other instruments, and we're going to try and match that today. This is a color I've been asked to do before, and it's quite different from this sunburst. Color is such a subjective thing. Once you develop your taste and decide exactly what you want, you'll want to be able to repeat that color. In order to match the color in this mandolin, I made up a test block of different shades of yellow through red to brown. On my color patch, I used pure yellow, and as I gradually started mixing red with it, I got to pure red. And then I started mixing brown with the red in higher and higher amounts until I got to pure brown. There are 2 browns and 2 reds. The way I did this was on this line right here, there's 100 parts yellow to 1 part red. This is 50 to 1, 16 to 1, and so on. This is 1 to 1 until I got to the pure red. Now the 2 reds were crimson red on the top line, and the bottom is ruby red. The yellow is still the same. On the browns, I used 2 browns. This one was a nut brown walnut, and this one was a dark walnut brown. And I mixed them the same way with the different ratios. Now, when I want to choose a color, I might say, this is the color I want. I look down and it's 8 to 1, 8 parts yellow to 1 part red. For spraying this sunburst, I'm going to do it in 3 steps. I'm going to spray this amber color in the center, the reddishness in between, and then the dark brown on right at the rim. I'll go to this color chart and try and match those 3 colors. So let's do that now. For the center part of this sunburst, I think I'm going to pick this one right here, which is 50 to 1 yellow. For the intermediate color, I think I'd pick this color patch. This is 4 to 1, 4 parts yellow to 1 part red. And for that dark rim area right up to next to the binding, I'll pick this color right here, which is 4 parts dark brown to 1 part red. I sized this spruce top with a mixture of 1 part hide glue to 4 parts water in the wood preparation stage. The reason for this was to overcome a couple of problems of spruce. There's fissures and little marks in the spruce that absorb extra finish, and I want the lightest finish possible on the top, and the unevenness with the way spruce absorbs stain, especially on a carved top instrument. The way I sized this was to wet the raw spruce with the glue and water mixture, and as the fibers swelled up and the glue dried, it would close off the fissures and the end grain. Then I would sand it and repeat that. Hide glue sizing fills the fissures and allows for the thinnest possible finish. It controls the stain absorption. It's almost essential for a wiped-on stain to avoid the blotchy look. We're going to spray the stain on this instrument.
This is 1 part red, which I'll mix with 50 parts yellow. All the colorants used on this mandolin will be the Lockwood powders mixed into water, water-soluble lanolins. Test your yellow base coat on a scrap piece, this is my scrap board, to make sure you have the right color.
I had to add a little more red, but now I've got the color that I want. Be sure to blow away all the loose dust that might be on there. I like this door jamb gun, and I'm spraying at 50 pounds, and I've got it throttled way back. There's a lot of air coming out, not much color. It really atomizes the fluid. Okay, now I've mixed up my red, and I'm going to try it on this practice board again. Now this board, incidentally, I'll sand the color off and try it again. I'll use it over and over for each batch that I try until it's not usable anymore. As I spray, I just keep comparing the test to the old mandolin. What I'm spraying here is just the pure stain. It's the water mixed with the powder. I'm spraying it very lightly. If I spray too heavy, it's going to get wet and run. You don't really have to let this dry too long. About the time it takes to mix the colors and get ready for the next coat, and it'll be ready. I got the brown mixed up, and I'm practicing on my scrap piece. You can see some of the subtleties you get with this water-soluble stain. Up in the right-hand quarter, you're seeing some of the medullary rays of the quarter sawn section of the wood, and you're seeing all the figure and how it reflects different light. I'm not going to need to do a lot of sanding on this because I prepared the wood real well. I sized the top. The stain is down in the wood. And now I'm going to just put lacquer on top. I sprayed some lacquer on my test patch here, just on this side of it, and I wasn't quite satisfied with the color. So I took the black aniline and just lightly sprayed the edge. After it dried, I sprayed clear lacquer over that, and I was quite satisfied with it. This is the black Lockwood water stain. This is the part I like. Take that binding tape off. Well, Dan, before you head back to your shop, let's put a few coats of clear gloss on this so you can see what it looks like.
Bye, Don.
Bye, Dan. See you later.
Boy, that was great, wasn't it? Don's an incredibly good builder, ace finisher, excellent repairman, and he's the head of our shop at Stuart McDonald and also heads the R&D department. He's my pal. Well, they talk about saving the best for last. I haven't really done that. I've saved the easiest for last. We're going to go on and do a little bit of custom colors now and solid opaque finishes. Then review what we've learned and then cut on out of here because I think I'm running out of time. A minute before I go on here, Don just called to ask me to remind you that when you're talking about a sunburst like he just did, if you don't like the final shade, if it's a little too harsh, this is a little yellow, you can still tone it. He forgot to tell you that. Like I can tone this with Hydrocoat clear and put a little water stain into it. Earlier we colored the red shader on that little Les Paul sunburst with dry powders added to flow out. Now I'm using the Lockwood water stain. I told you then we didn't like to add water to Hydrocoat, and I was sort of trying to prove a point. But you can use the water stain directly into Hydrocoat, especially in such small amounts as this. A drop of the Lockwood Ruby and we got her. By the way, when you're dealing with Hydrocoat, the color could look horrible in the jar. This looks like mud brown because of the general whitish look of Hydrocoat when it's liquid form. Don't be misled by that. This is the right color. When it dries, it's going to be the golden tint I'm after. One smooth coat of shader and that'll tone down the harshness of any sunburst. Here I'm using the Miller 2000 gun. It works great for colors. Cleans easily and it's inexpensive. I can keep one for every color. Maybe you can't see the difference at home, but you can see it here in the shop. It's just a very subtle shading with this muddy paint. If you joined us for the first tape in this series, you'll recognize this guitar and you'll know it's got a lacquer finish on it. I've sanded it back a bit and I'm going to mix up a custom color to spray over it. I'm choosing between teal green and seafoam green, two Fender custom colors. I'm going for this light bluish green called seafoam green. If you're tinting the lighter shades, the pastel shades, start out with white lacquer. You can use either the Wolf or mix your own from Master Color and add your color to that. It'll get you there a lot quicker. This is straight Wolf white lacquer, unthinned as of yet. I'll thin it 50-50. But I'll color it before I thin it. Here's a little blue Master Color. Touch of green Master Color too. These aren't a lot, just little bits at a time. A taste of yellow. The yellow turns it just the shade you want. I got it. You see the one I'm trying to match here, I was mixed up out of a Duco lacquer at DuPont. That's their original seafoam green. It's acrylic. I don't want to mess with acrylics. I'm just trying to stick to the nitro here. I'm going to thin it at least 50%. Again, I'm using the Miller 2000 to spray my color because I don't like to dirty up my expensive guns. They're harder to clean. And you don't need a lot of paint to get an even coverage. You can spray nitrocellulose over acrylic, by the way. I mentioned buying your paint at the paint store, but it's not advised. You're best off to stick it with nitrocellulose entirely, and that's why we offer master colors. Once you get good coverage, stop and go to your clear. You don't have to paint a whole bunch of coats of color on. Once it's opaque, you're ready for clear. Started with the white base. I added some blue and some green and some yellow. Got seafoam green. Now on to something else. I've got this baby Les Paul body that had a big crack down the center. I filled it with a piece of wood. This is alder, and I want to hide that repair job when I refinish it and make it look like mahogany. I'm staining it with a really dark brown Lockwood water stain. It's a walnut. It looks almost black on camera. It lightens up as it dries, and I want it to look this dark because it'll hide that strip of wood fill much easier, and it's going to give me a look that my most favorite guitar had. It was a gold top Les Paul from the 50s that I got from Mike Bloomfield. It was a very dark mahogany, and it had a gold top. So I'm going to make this a gold top too. That's a solid color. Spray clear lacquer on the body, on the back, the sides, and the top, seal in that color. This is just a water stain. It already looks kind of the way I want it to. And get a good layer on that maple. This maple isn't really good enough for a sunburst. We're going to mix up some gold. Be very careful with these bronze powders. It's really bronze, not gold. They're so fine you would never want to breathe them. Make sure your fan's on. Start with 1/4 teaspoon for 2 ounces. Put the powder in the jar and add a little thinner to that to get it wet, just to break it down and get it into a slight solution, not very much. Cap off the bronze powder and put that in a safe jar. That's what I call it. That dust wants to get everywhere. Don't blow on it or let the wind hit it. Put that aside. 2 ounces of pre-mixed lacquer, 1/4 teaspoon of the dust, and you want to shake it and stir it real well and spray it soon because it'll go out of solution and settle in the bottom of the jar. You've got to like taping and papering in this business. Here we go again. I'm definitely going to use the Miller 2000 for this job because it's so messy with the gold dust. I'll never use this gun or jar for anything else. The gold dust will always be in there. And the Miller 2000 is inexpensive enough that I can replace them. Keep shaking it up or stir it up all the time. It settles out really fast. And as soon as you get coverage, you're done. You don't have to spray a lot. Once you can't see the wood, quit and go to your clear. This is ready for clear. As soon as I sprayed my clear on this, I got a nice white blush. You can barely see it on a gold top though, because it's moist and rainy outside. To get rid of a blush, you use that aerosol blush eraser. Keep it around. It's in a handy spray can. Expect to use up any paint that you make in the first day because it'll gel in a few days and turn the lacquer to green jelly and settle to the bottom and be no good anymore. That's why I use small jars of it. Don't mix more than you're going to use. Scraping the binding on a gold top is definitely cool. You'll have to try it to know what I mean. If you're mixing up a color that doesn't have white as a base, like a solid red, you add it directly to the clear lacquer. It was obvious to me that our base concentrate on the left was very close to the real Fiesta Red on the right. I just needed to add a little black or brown to tone it a bit. Break down your master colors in a little thinner first. It'll go into the lacquer easier. And you'll use a fair amount to color lacquer opaque. but start small and go until it covers. I'm going to go check my time clock here and probably be getting ready to say goodbye, folks. Touch of black Tinsol. You can add Tinsol to lacquer too. I haven't found anything yet that Tinsol won't go into, but you've always got to get the right quantities and test it on scrap to make sure it dries. A little bit more. And I did check the clock and it's about time to go. Too bad because I'm having fun. There's the match. A little bit of black's all that needed. Well, I'd say we learned an awful lot on this tape, and I hope you had fun, because I sure did. There's more to tell, but you have to stop somewhere. Like, you could have enhanced the grain on this guitar with red or green or blue, any color you liked. It didn't have to be silver gray. All the coloring on this guitar could have been used under clear lacquer with a somewhat different effect. This is a 1959 Fender Blonde without that yellowed effect. Sometime you try it yourself. Do a Tele Blonde without the yellow. That's my favorite color. But don't be offended, because I think what we did here is great, especially when you put the black pickguard on it. But if I had to pick a favorite, it would be this little guy here. What I'm going to do now is catch the neck up to the body, stain the mahogany with some clear water, water stain, paint the face of the peg head black with lacquer, seal the whole thing up with some clear lacquer, and get on out of here. Thanks for being with us.